This is ContactTalkRadio.com. Consciousness in action. And you are taking action into your consciousness by tuning into Contact Talk Radio.
And on TuneIn.com, Ping.fm, and UpSnap Mobile.
Contact Talk Radio.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hope. Free to come and free to go. Free to come and free to go. Open up the book of stars. Open up the
Hello, everyone, and welcome to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking. I'm your host, SHERI HORN HASAN of Karmic Evolution Astrology, coming to you on February 10th, 2022 from Contact Talk Radio. Just a quick reminder that this show aims to bring you the truth about astrology and your soul's karmic evolution. I am my own guest again today, so first I will hit you with my usual housekeeping stuff, which is to tell you that you can listen anytime to Karmic Evolution's Astrologically Speaking by simply going to my website at karmicevolution.com and clicking on the upper right-hand portion of the banner labeled Radio Show. From there, you can scroll down the page and hear the most recent show, either live or recorded, and or search the archive listings for past shows that you might have missed or to which you'd like to listen again. Separately, you can follow me on my Facebook page, which is Karmic Evolution for Your Soul, and it's there you can sign up for my Conversations About Consciousness newsletter as well. And lastly, I'm still offering my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading to listeners for only $99. And this reading is for those of you who are interested in astrology and want to learn more about the true meaning of your individual birth chart or natal horoscope. Those terms are synonymous. Essentially, this is a snapshot of the exact position of the planets at the precise moment and location of your birth, and it reveals a great deal about you. So when it's used as a tool for soul growth, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading can be tremendously helpful for learning your soul's true purpose and how to move towards your highest destiny in this lifetime. You can also learn about patterns of behavior that originated early in life or during past lives that may be affecting your current relationships, career, finances, and or health, but also discern whether or not these patterns no longer serve your soul's karmic journey forward. In other words, a lot of us have been conditioned to view things a certain way. And when we do that, we then manifest things along the lines of old conditioning, meaning we fall back into old behavioral patterns. So to learn more about what those patterns are, where they originated from, and why, this reading can be hugely instrumental. And finally, a Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading gives you insights into what tripped you up in the past and provides new information that will help you to change your perspective by entertaining you'll entertain new perspectives as you gain greater awareness through astrological insight of your own individual unique natal chart. And why? For the purpose of bringing greater happiness and satisfaction into your life. So all of this is easy when you take advantage of my 1-hour discounted Karmic Evolution Natal Insight reading for only $99. Simply email me at SHERI, that's SHERI, at karmicevolution.com, and we'll get your reading scheduled as soon as possible. At almost half the regular price, conscious awareness has never been so easy or so affordable. Okay, so now let's get to this week's astro news you can use. The monthly lunar cycles still waxing this week since the Aquarius new moon until we hit next week's Leo full moon, February 16th. So we're still growing our tribe and searching for freedom within groups to be accepted for who and what we truly are, warts and all, as I've said before. And before I go forward with the astrological news coming, I'd like to look back a little at February 8th's Mars in Capricorn trine to Uranus and Taurus. And that was only 2 days ago. Well, that's the day it perfected, right? So it means that its energies were strongest as it was waxing up to February 8th. And we know, as I've said before, that Mars in Capricorn is like the general. He's straight up and seriously interested in strategic success. In short, Mars here is exalted in traditional astrology because when in Capricorn, the Capricorn archetype tempers the natural impatience and impetuousness of Mars in a positive way by corralling it into an organized structure. So the means to the end is not pure animus or ambition, assertion, or God forbid violence. Rather, it's tempered, planned, and has an end goal in mind. And of course, Capricorn, which is associated, is ruled by Saturn, and Saturn rules the 10th house in the natural chart. So therefore, for all of us, is about success, right? So success is about achievement. What can we achieve? So Mars focuses its energies on achieving something in Capricorn, but it does it cautiously, slowly, and with, like I said, an end goal or a plan in mind. It doesn't go off, willy-nilly. I mean, in traditional astrology too, Mars was originally ruled by Aries, A-R-E-S, not A-R-I-E-S, the war god, and that's according to the Greeks. And he was known as an archetypal energy that was all about bloodlust. Kill for the sake of killing. So he represented that very primitive nature of mankind that just wants to go out and hack somebody's head off with a hatchet, But in Capricorn, he's far more focused, has far more of a purpose, and as I said, is willing to slow down in order to be cautious enough to develop a strategic plan so he can achieve his goal. Now, leading up to this February 8th Mars in Cap trine Uranus in Taurus, we experienced a few interesting occurrences in the collective, one of which was the announcement, first by New Jersey Governor Phil Murphy, and then followed by several other governors. According to the New York Times, and here I quote, "The abrupt shift in policy began to play out last week when members of the National Governors Association asked President Biden to provide clear guidelines for their states to move on from the pandemic crisis response and to recognize that the virus was here to stay and that it could be managed without completely upending daily life." So as of last week, as we were waxing into the Mars trine Uranus and then directly following in the past 2 days, 9 states, all with Democratic governors, had statewide mask mandates in place. And several other states had local mask mandates or mandates that only covered schools. But last Monday, 2 days right before February 8th, Governor Phil Murphy of New Jersey, again a Democrat, announced that he would no longer require students and school employees to wear masks, which contradicts the current recommendations of the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention. Other Democratic governors in California, Connecticut, Delaware, and Oregon quickly moved to lift some mask mandates. So again, I'm getting to the point that well, I'll tell you that in a second. So let's just talk about what the happenings were, and then I'll explain more about the precise definition of Mars trine Uranus. So New York's, and this is still according to the New York Times, New York's governor Kathy Hochul said on Wednesday, which was yesterday, that she was ending the state's indoor masking rules. The governor of Massachusetts, Charlie Baker, announced that face coverings would soon become optional in schools. And by day's end, the governors of Illinois, Rhode Island, and Washington said that they too would loosen coronavirus rules. End quote. So what's the classic definition of a Mars trine Uranus? Well, according to astrologer Rob Hand's Planets in Transit, and I'm quoting from that book, personal inhibitions often keep people from doing many things that they would like to do. With this transit, you will find the courage to break free of these inhibitions, at least for a while, and thereby gain new freedom. Also, at this time, you may be liberated from many of the duties and obligations that have prevented you from doing what you want. So again, we saw Mars in Capricorn. Read also, Capricorn is, Capricorn is the successful leader, right? So in this context, I'm reading Capricorn in Mars or Mars in Capricorn as a serious person, and in this case, in the form of governors led initially by New Jersey Governor Murphy, who are responding to the dropping pandemic numbers, particularly in their individual states, by granting residents newfound freedom. So, we can see that this astrology stuff kind of works, right? We've also seen the word freedom bandied about by the convoy of truckers currently clogging up the highways and local streets in the Canadian capital of Ottawa because they're demanding freedom from vaccine and mask mandates. So it pays here to remember that energies forming and perfecting in the sky don't really give a darn how you manifest them, because these energies are neutral. So here's a different version of a response to the desire to be free, sparked in part by Mars trine Uranus, as well as the upcoming Mercury-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, which will perfect for the third time on February 11th. And again, I'm reading from the New York Times. This is the history of the truckers' dispute as they all have converged in Ottawa and other cities in Canada. Quote, this dispute began on January 29th with protests by truckers over vaccine mandates imposed by the government of Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. That's Canadian Prime Minister. They have since mushroomed into an occupation of Canada's capital and to broader demonstrations over pandemic rules like vaccination mandates, shutdowns, and mask requirements, as well as Mr. Trudeau's stewardship of the country. They have also spread well beyond the capital. So, end quote, but I'm going to go back to quoting because by yesterday, and again, according to the New York Times, and I'm quoting here, Ottawa's police chief told the city council on Monday afternoon that it will take 1,800 more police officers to end a protest by truckers that has paralyzed the city's downtown for 11 days, leading to the mayor's declaring a state of emergency. Again, we're waxing toward Mercury conjunct Pluto. All right. So communication that they're in Capricorn that may be restrictive and or a power play is juxtaposed against Mars trine Uranus, which is freedom for freedom's sake. So here's I continue to quote now. We continue to employ all available officers. There are no days off, Chief Peter Slowly told the special meeting. This is not sustainable. Someone is going to get killed or seriously injured because of the irresponsible behavior of some of these people, Jim Watson, Ottawa's mayor, warned on Sunday. Again, leading up to Mars trine Uranus, which is going to be followed by Mercury conjunct Pluto and Capricorn. City officials and the chief of police said they were under siege. The demonstrations during which some protesters have desecrated national memorials and threatened local residents have shaken a country known globally as a model for humanism and serenity. That's an interesting word, right? Serenity is a key word for Taurus, actually. And Taurus is ruled by Venus. Further, and here I quote again, thousands turned out to protest in Toronto and Quebec City over last weekend. Truck convoys congregated near provincial legislatures in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Manitoba, and British Columbia. Downtown Ottawa, site of the country's parliament, remained paralyzed last Monday as truckers parked their vehicles across busy thoroughfares. End quote. So bear in mind, again, this was all as Mars was waxing toward its trine to Uranus. So on one hand, we had a fight for greater freedom by these truckers, freedom from restriction, right? While on the other hand, we saw progress toward greater individual freedom being made through several U.S. governors. I also believe mask mandates are being loosened, or at this point, that's planned in some other nations as well, making this also, or exemplifying for us this energy on an international level. I saw something just recently about England also, but I think there's several other European countries that are planning to eliminate or reduce mask mandates throughout their provinces as well. So as we wax toward the February 11th Mercury-Pluto conjunction in Capricorn, the question becomes, will we see more announcements that demand freedom and more that are granted freedom, even though one situation might be completely unrelated to the others, right? Will the truckers in Canada, many of them made up of U.S. citizens espousing a far-right philosophy, read ideology, get what they want by then, whether they get what they want, but then they simply continue to threaten. And on the other hand, will additional locations elsewhere, both in the U.S. and abroad, reduce restrictions, particularly those related to the pandemic? Now, I'll just bring in the topic really quickly that in the U.S., at least, the reduction of mask mandates, particularly those in schools, is not being met with joy everywhere. So between the Mars trine Uranus and the Mercury conjunct Pluto, which hasn't happened yet, we're looking at also a power struggle here, right? Whether teachers want to go maskless in schools, and schools are actually controlled through local school boards, as many of us have, recognized over the past 2 years during this pandemic, as well as during the recent spate of book banning proposals through different states and different countries, most notably, not countries, but most notably the state of Texas and Florida, but other places as well. So we see that potentially coming to a head also, right? Can freedom of speech, Mercury, be controlled, Pluto, by organizations? I mean, the sun's still in Aquarius, by groups and by organizations, Capricorn, related to education. Freedom of speech is one issue. Freedom of thought is another, right? So if you can't read what you want to read or be taught how to become a critical thinker in the confines of the classroom, then, what is this power struggle against that about, right? I'd also mention, albeit briefly, the Olympics taking place right now in Beijing, China, where several athletes, particularly those involved in sports demanding both athletic strength and speed, aka Mars, such as skiing, bobsledding, ice skating, and snowboarding, have brought both wonderful and disappointing results. I mean, several bobsledders, there was a hysterical clip, if you can find it, on YouTube a couple of days ago. I'm going to say maybe even over last weekend, I don't remember, with an he sounded Australian, I believe he was, commentator, right? And they showed clip after clip of this one race with female bobsledders wiping out. And they all had problems with one particular curve where they were all sort of thrown off course. And they ended up, wiping out and then disqualifying themselves. But the way that the guy was narrating what was happening was pretty hysterical. So if you can find it, check YouTube for the female, women's bobsledding or whatever, But also the skier, the well-known skier, Michaela Schifrin, who's the American two-time Olympic gold medalist, and I think it was a four-time World Cup alpine skier, in addition to other awards and medals that she's won, who was hoping for gold at this Olympics, that she has been thwarted. I'm not sure if she's done or whether with all her races or whether she still has one or two to go, but she's been thwarted thus far when she missed a gate early in her first run and was automatically eliminated. I think she wiped out. And that mistake for Schifrin came just 2 days after she fell in the giant slalom and was eliminated in that event. So it kind of makes you wonder where some of these transits are falling in her chart, right? If I had time, I'd take a look at it, but unfortunately, there's too much more to get to. So Mercury and Pluto, when they meet up, they represent the kind of investigative energy and a potentially obsessive one that represents a time when we're not satisfied with superficial information and are driven to go deeper. This means on a personal level, we may get in greater touch with why we think the way we do, and then decide whether we want to continue in that vein or change our thoughts. So we need only to look at the ongoing situation here as Russia continues to amass troops, which number approximately still about 130,000 on the Ukrainian and Belarus, I guess, borders. But Russia also continues to send, the latest news, they're continuing to send the support troops necessary to sustain their military there. And in the form of medical personnel and people who control supplies so that they can distribute them. They can prepare food to sustain the army. What is it? The army travels on its stomach, right? I don't remember who said that or when, but probably one of the generals from back in World War I or II. If you don't have that stuff in place, you can't support keeping the troops where they are, right? So whether we'll see more announcements, perhaps in the form of threats or manipulated information, as Russia has already propagandized. Mercury, Pluto, also an energy very ripe for taking information and skewing it in order to control people's thoughts and their reactions. This is true also in terms of the pandemic situation with the masks, right? Or the mandates, the vaccines, the masks, and everything to do with the pandemic. Some Americans, if I just revert for a second to talking about the pandemic, in addition to the issues with the schools and the school boards, perhaps not wanting to go along with their governor's loosening of mask mandates and restrictions in the classroom, we also have, the fact that a lot of medical people, and I gave a little lip service to that. It said the CDC doesn't necessarily agree with all of the elimination of these mask mandates because the Omicron diagnoses, the numbers are coming down, but people are still getting sick. And those numbers are not nothing, So, and U.S. has now reached 900,000 deaths since the beginning of the pandemic, while the world, I think, has reached like 500,000. So, we excel, but at the wrong things here. So anyway, getting back to Russia, and again, Russia has already propagandized this situation by characterizing its own potential invasion of a sovereign nation as a defensive move against the U.S., against what it calls U.S. aggression in this area. Again, Pluto, Mercury, manipulation of information, right? Propaganda. That remains to be seen, but I think we can pretty much count on it. Of course, announcements and pronouncements by others who wield power will likely be forthcoming as well by the time this energy perfects. What will be interesting to see is if Mercury's re-entry into more logical, rational, and objective Aquarius, where he'll remain until March 9th, helps reduce tensions. Now he moves into Aquarius on Valentine's Day, February 14th. So again, we've got the perfection of Mercury, Pluto, and then a few days later, we've got Mercury moving out of Capricorn and into Aquarius, where theoretically, at least, is more, I won't say open-minded, because he can be more ideological, which is fixed in their thought, in one's thoughts, but also it allows in, like I said, the ability to look at information objectively, right? So we've already seen, as Mars approaches a conjunction to Venus, with both of them in Capricorn, on February 16th, the efforts by French Prime Minister Emmanuel Macron to act as an intermediary between Europe, the US, and Russia in terms of what's going on vis-a-vis this conflict. And at first, reports in the Western press made it sound like Macron had made progress during his hours-long meeting with Putin, but the Kremlin tamped down Western speculation pretty quickly, saying they'd agreed to pretty much nothing during this meeting. But we've also seen that Putin and China's leader, Xi Jinping, met as well. Mercury, Pluto, a sign that the two are joining forces against Western dominance in the world. Again, we're still approaching the February 11th Mercury Pluto exact meeting. And I don't use the word meeting lightly, right? We've seen it happen literally now. It would seem in this light that, again, Mercury's reentrance into Aquarius will result in a realignment of groups in order to consolidate power. Clearly, we're seeing this go on as well in U.S. politics, as this past week, both former Vice President Mike Pence and current GOP Senator Mitch McConnell both broke away from the growing conviction, again, Mars trine Uranus, from the growing conviction by a large portion of Republicans that the 2020 election was stolen through election fraud. We may also see more unearthing of previously hidden information, such as that being uncovered by the U.S. House of Representatives January 6th committee investigating the insurrection of that date in 2021. Documents, Mercury, are still being discovered, Pluto, that shed more and more light on what actually happened both that day and leading up to it. The latest revelation being the destruction of official documents by former President Trump. I don't know if everybody's current with the news, but they found boxes of paperwork at Mar-a-Lago that were supposed to have gone to the archives, and a lot of them contain national security information, classified information, which is actually against the law. You can't take those documents home with you. And also what's been in the news recently is the ripping up of documents, that Trump had a habit of ripping up official documents after he was done with them and throwing them, I don't know where, but that a lot of people on the January 6th, that have been hired to work with the committee, some of their tasks has actually been collecting these bagfuls of ripped up pieces of paper and taping them back together again. I mean, oh my God, right? So there again, we see this intense investigation of Mercury Pluto going on, which is focused like a laser, right? On making sense out of something that has to do with communication. Now, meanwhile, as we're waxing towards a Venus-Mars meetup in Capricorn that takes place hours before the Leo full moon on February 16th, we can see also, especially since Venus stationed direct January 29th and Mercury followed suit on February 3rd, that all of the major planets in the sky are now direct. This would imply that it's full steam ahead, and I'd interpret that to mean for issues mirrored back to us in the collective, for example, including the pandemic's recession and our response to that, and Congress and other politicians' agendas, as well as those of each of us on a personal level. We've got the third and final Mercury meetup with Pluto on February 11th, which I spoke about last week. when I related it to, among other things, what I've just talked about, which is the saber rattling by the Russians, who've massed more than, again, 130,000 troops on the borders of Ukraine and Belarus. So this is what I said last week. All of this will lead us to February 11th's third conjunction of Mercury to Pluto and Capricorn, which between now and then, as it waxes toward fruition, can bring some intense mental activity. We may choose to dedicate this to an obsessive quest for power through manipulation, or to better understand ourselves and what makes us tick mentally. Read how we think and communicate. Our capacity to influence others is strong now, but it may cause power struggles and disagreements with those who oppose what it is we have to say. Beware manipulative language. And this I'm really saying, the as above, so below. The macrocosm is showing us what may emerge in our own, or has already emerged in our own personal lives. And that brings again to mind the current crisis situation between Russia, the Ukraine, and the U.S. and its NATO allies. Again, I already mentioned that it's clear that Vladimir Putin of Russia has been attempting to manipulate public opinion, both at home and abroad, by convincing others that the U.S. is staging an attack on its military forces that are massed along the Ukrainian borders. And that, the U.S. Times had pointed this out last week with a headline that said U.S. exposes what it says is Russian effort to fabricate pretext for invasion. And the Russians had actually fabricated a fake video that showed an attack by Ukrainians on Russian territory or Russian speakers in eastern Ukraine. Now, since then, U.S. President Biden has reacted by sending 3,000 American troops to the area, and the European NATO nations have signified alliance against Russia if it does indeed roll its tanks or troops over Ukrainian borders. Now, a little bit of history on the Russian military buildup here, because I think this is kind of important as context. And this is from the Washington Post. And I quote, "For months, maps highlighting Russian troop deployments near Ukraine's border have shown Russian forces massing east of Ukraine, as well as along the northern border close to the capital, Kyiv. Over the past year, Russia has been gradually shifting troops, adding to an already robust and permanent military posture. Russia first deployed additional forces in significant numbers in early March 2021. So that's a year ago almost. Some of these military units never left the area. In late 2021, only a few months ago, the Russian military presence increased further and additional forces continued to move toward Ukraine, many traveling all the way from Russia's Far East. At the same time, Russian diplomats have been sending contradictory signals, assuring the media and Western nations that Russia has, quote, no intentions to attack Ukraine, while claiming that the West must answer Russian demands for security assurances, or Moscow will be forced to pursue a, quote, military technical solution of its own. So as we move now, again, not to sound like I'm beating a dead horse, but it is Mercury, Pluto, and that does have to do with obsession, right? As we move towards, so I'm not immune from it. As we move towards this conjunction, I'm obsessed about talking about the Russians, okay? As well as this Venus-Mars meetup on February 16th, we've seen some high-level diplomatic energies exerted. And again, French President Macron interjected himself as a mediator between Europe and NATO and the U.S. and Russia's Vladimir Putin. So this is what was reported out of Paris in February 6th, New York Times. Quote, the standoff with Russia over Ukraine enters a critical phase this week. The United States has snapped NATO to attention and moved forces east. Moscow has readied still more forces on the Ukraine border, but beneath those tensions, diplomatic avenues are being feverishly explored, and the outlines of potential solutions, still amorphous, may be taking form. It is Mr. Macron who has positioned himself at the center of the diplomacy in Europe. To Moscow, he is a, quote, quality interlocutor, as Mr. Putin called Mr. Macron, according to a senior official in the French presidency, speaking on the condition of an anonymity in keeping with French government practice, end quote. So as we're witnessing Venus-Mars waxing to a conjunction, And these efforts to mediate now, we might ask ourselves on a personal level, where's the showdown looming in our lives? And who holds the real power? Those who threaten or those who negotiate? And how long would successful negotiations last before the tensions either explode or becomes mitigated? So since February 14th brings Mercury's re-entrance into Aquarius, where he'll remain until March 9th, we might assume that conversations again become more rational, more logical, and more theoretical rather than demanding, restrictively controlling, or otherwise boundaried by Saturn's Capricorn. And on the morning of February 16th, Venus and Mars meet, exact, and kiss at 16 degrees and 56 minutes of Capricorn, just before the Leo full moon occurs later that evening at 8:50. I'm sorry, I said evening. No, it's later that morning at 8:56 a.m. Pacific time and 11:56 a.m. Eastern time at 27 degrees 59 minutes of the Leo Aquarius polarity. Sun's in Aquarius, moon's going to oppose it at this lunation from the sign of Leo. Now, I want to give you a little bit more obsessive detail about the Venus-Mars meetup, because it starts a new synodic cycle, which means that it lasts from February 16th until the next time they come together, which will be February 22nd, 2024, when they'll meet in the new sign. So it's the next time they come together in a new sign, okay? Because they'll meet then, February 22nd, 2024, at 7 degrees and 20-something minutes of Aquarius. But right now, they're, as I said, at 1656 of Capricorn. So this February 16th meetup signifies, and I'm quoting here, attraction to and desire for the opposite sex, according to Rob Hand in his book Planets in Transit. However, because Venus, the faster moving planet, is applying to Mars, that's the norm, okay? But usually that's the case. But in this particular case, because Venus is slowly getting up to speed due to her recent retrograde motion and having stationed direct, place a planet when it stations direct, which she did on January 29th, it takes a while for them to get moving again. So in this case, Mars is actually catching up to Venus, which is just an interesting nuance to note, that at this beginning of a new synodic cycle, Mars is actually catching up to Venus rather than the other way around. And here, I said, the effect is to soften the nature of Mars and make you more willing to meet your partner's needs, again, according to Rob Hand. With our need for affection strong, leading up to this aspect, we'll be more willing to work with rather than against our partners and others now. We satisfy our ego drives by working successfully with another, particularly in areas related to commitment, because this particular conjunction is in Capricorn. And that's whether this commitment falls in our personal life, the business realm, with friends or whatever, friends, family, community, society, whatever. We may also find ourselves more easily able to put aside our inhibitions and be a bit more social now and or engage more easily in creative expression. So that's inherent in the nature of the Venus-Mars meetup, but we can see more easily able to put aside our inhibitions echoes the Mars trine to Uranus, right? So for those interested in more detailed information, whether you like it or not, about Venus-Mars cycle, I first found an interesting article written by the well-respected astrologer Robert Blaschke, who I believe is no longer with us, which goes into a bit more detail about this cycle. And I'm going to quote from something he wrote, I think in the Mountain Astrologer a couple of years back. And it says, what Dane Rudyard and Alexander Ruperti had researched was that although Venus and Mars formed conjunctions about every 2 years, a cycle of 5 conjunctions was found to recur, in which Venus was retrograde in nearly every 5th conjunction between these two planets. The alignments of retrograde Venus and direct Mars recurred approximately every 77 months and were part of a longer recurrence pattern wherein the conjunctions would form in the same sign every 32 years, within 7 to 8 degrees of the last conjunction. And then there's the recent piece that's part of the Mountain Astrologer magazine's blog post by astrologer Michelle, I don't know how to pronounce her name, it's Finey, so whether it's Finney or Finey, I'm not sure, who published a 2012 book titled The Sacred Dance of Venus and Mars. And she writes on this blog post that that book examines the 32-year cycle of the celestial lovers as their conjunctions step along the zodiac. Further, she notes, when I first undertook this research in 2008, I was fascinated to discover the amazing scope and pattern that Venus and Mars create as they rendezvous every 32 years, and as that pattern unfolds through time over thousands of years. So she writes in this current blog some really interesting stuff that I wanted to share here. Quote, Venus represents our values and personal preferences, which are the basis of our relationships. What do we have in common with others? How much are we willing to compromise? Venus informs many of our key decisions. In a wider context, the 32-year cycle of Venus and Mars speaks to our social values and the collective actions that arise from them. Significantly, in early 2022, we witnessed the birth of a new series of Venus-Mars conjunctions. This is the fourth pair of new cycles in the current group of 5, which spans the years 1964 to 2034. The group of 5 new pairs, which includes 10 conjunctions that were born prior to this, spanned the years 1665 to 1736. So it's clear that these are rare stellar events. The first pair of new conjunctions in our modern era happened in July and August 1964. The short interval between these conjunctions, without a conjunction having taken place 32 years prior to either of them at a similar zodiac degree, is how we recognize that a new series has commenced. The 60s saw a huge surge in creativity and rapid social change. Of course, this was a revolutionary time due to the conjunction of Uranus and Pluto in 1966, but Venus and Mars played key roles as well. This was not just a time of political revolution, but society was being transformed by a groundswell of social change and an outpouring of creativity. These two conjunctions were in Gemini and Cancer. People suddenly felt free to communicate their sexual preferences. Topics that were previously taboo were now spoken about openly. Sex, drugs, and rock and roll, remember? The contraceptive pill changed the role of women who no longer felt their place was only in the home. Relationships took on a new freedom. Music and art flourished. And I'm still quoting from Michelle Finney's article. The second pair of new conjunctions was in 1977. In Aries and Taurus. Once again, we witnessed a rapid escalation of social change. The sexual revolution was in full swing, and the counterculture of the 60s took on a new, renewed vitality. New music styles, disco, punk, and the heavy metal swept the world. In 1983, the third pair of new conjunctions, now in Leo and Virgo, ramped up the speed of social change once again. With the growing impact of computer technology in the workplace, the sexually transmitted disease AIDS was identified, and the first clinic to treat the disease was established in San Francisco. Interestingly enough, and I'm not quoting here, I just saw right before I came on air a quick news piece. I saw the headline that one of the scientists who had done something related to advancing our ability to treat AIDS just died today, or it was announced today. So whether he died yesterday or whatever, I don't know. So that's interesting synchronicity, right? So, also notable, says Michelle Finney, and I'm quoting again, Australia won the America's Cup in September 83, just as the new Leo cycle began on September 19. This was the first time any country beside the U.S. had won. It was a euphoric time of celebration and a dramatic energy shift. So new cycles have been born since then until now. The fourth new pair of conjunctions in the current group of 5 commences in February 2022. The first of these conjunctions, she says, is on February 17th. That's probably based on her time zone of 2022 at 1653 Capricorn. We can expect a major shift in the role that government plays in society, especially where inequality and gender bias still exist. This is just one possible area where a groundswell of public opinion may bring about social change. The second Venus-Mars conjunction will take place on March 6, 2022. And again, I think her date varies slightly from mine because she's in a different location, at precisely 0 degrees 1 minute of Aquarius, the very gateway to Aquarius. The December 20th, 2020 conjunction of Jupiter and Saturn was right at this gateway as well, at 0 degrees 29 minutes of Aquarius. This conjunction foreshadows the social and political restructuring that will likely unfold over the coming 20 years. Future technologies will emerge that will no doubt alter our collective trajectory. The influx of Aquarian energy will also shift our thinking. Humans might start to recognize that we are all part of a global community. As we face the impacts of climate change, the survival of life on our planet will be determined by our individual and collective actions. Before we know it, Pluto too will cross into Aquarius during 2023 and 2024. New scientific discoveries, Aquarius, that revolutionize powerful institutions and economic systems, Pluto, are set to transform our world. Widespread social change generally comes about due to people power. These conjunctions of Venus, Mars, and Capricorn and Aquarius are likely to do just that. It seems we're about to open a portal of Aquarian influence that will infuse us personally and collectively with a potent and progressive agenda. Coming just 12 months before Pluto shifts into Aquarius, and with Saturn also in the sign of the water bearer, this surge of Aquarian energy is set to transform many of our social systems. These new cycles of Venus-Mars will stimulate the voice of people who know it's time for dramatic and comprehensive change. Aquarius, with its progressive attitudes and humanitarian themes, is focused on the future. And here I end the quote from Michelle's article. So there's so much inherent in that, right? Are we in the age of Aquarius? Some astrologers say yes, some say no. Stephen Forrest, which I mentioned before, makes the case that we've been in the age of Aquarius, or at least the beginnings of it, since the turn of the 20th century, as we went from the horse and buggy to the automobile, and in the late 60s to actually putting a man on the moon. Now we're looking at, since then, right, from the 80s on, okay, I'm struggling to find the word. The genesis of social media, right? Social media platforms and their ability to dispense information at rapid fire speed. Whereas before we had to pick up the newspaper and tune into our news channel, talk to people in the neighborhood or whatever. I mean, it's just like it's instantaneous. Many of us are just on our cell phones 24/7. And as soon as something's posted to Facebook or Instagram or TikTok or any of the other social media platforms, we are privy to it, right? So the speed with which information travels alone tells us that we're in a hugely Aquarian time. And with what Michelle Viney says here, with Pluto's entrance into Aquarius next year, which will last for the following 20 years, I think it's going to be pretty unarguable that we're really at the beginning of the 2,000-year journey of the Age of Aquarius, which means we're going to start to let go of a lot of the teachings, indoctrination, and just plain energies of the Age of Pisces, which we've been in since at least they changed the calendar with the birth and the death of Jesus Christ in, AD, Anno Domino, right? BC, before Christ, in 2000, in the year, whatever, 0 AD, right? Then we went backwards. So 2,200 years ago. Now, this leads us into the Leo full moon, which asks us, now that we've hopefully found our tribe, to not forget that whether we align ourselves with friends and groups or not, it's time for us to release our attachment to these, especially those with fixed ideologies, in order to allow our own individual, uniquely creative solar light to shine. Now, that's the basic message of this lunation. However, both luminaries form a square to the fixed transiting Scorpio South Node and Taurus North Node axis at this lunation, creating a tension that it asks us to resolve, both within the collective and our personal lives. So for all of what I just read you about Venus Mars conjunction that Michelle Viney writes about is interesting, right? Because, anytime planets square the nodal axis, whether it's in our natal charts or as the nodal axis is moving through the sky and everything's moving like clockwork, we face a change in our relationships, because the nodal axis is in opposition. All full moons are the opposition of the moon to the sun, right? So we're looking at relationships and how we may be changing them to better adjust and adapt for the purpose of our own survival in the future, right? Now, Uranus and Taurus is still opposing asteroid goddess Hygeia in Scorpio, and Hygeia is the symbol of health at this lunation too, meaning that it reflects a sudden break from the past, as evidenced, I think, by what I've already spoken about already, right? We need freedom. We need freedom. Okay, get rid of the masks. Okay, get rid of the other mandates in schools, Mercury, also Pluto, as I mentioned, schools, right? Mercury's Gemini is about elementary education from, basically preschool all the way up to high school. But I think, with Jupiter's involvement in the sky, depending, we also see it in the higher level educational venues as well. So given these current and ongoing energies, the question becomes whether taking ownership of our own quote unquote greatness in terms of our individual contributions to our family, our friends, our community, and our society as a whole brings us the freedom necessary to individuate or to become who we really came here to be. Now, such soul development must include finding our own talents and aptitudes rather than hiding our light under a bushel or in alignment with those who espouse fixed ideologies, even when those ideologies cause us to submerge our individual selves into a larger group hell-bent on achieving a particular goal or outcome. So, on one hand, there's a dichotomy here, right? One hand, it's like we were asked at the February 1st Aquarius new moon to plant seeds where we find our tribe, as I've said, like ad nauseum, right? I've used that phrase so much, even I'm sick of it. But the Leo new moon asks us to release our attachment to those groups if and when we're going along to get along, if and when we're accepting their ideologies, the ideology of the group, even when it's in opposition to our personal ideologies. For example, you can be a member of the GOP, right? You can vote, right? You can vote for Republicans, but if you have a transgender child and you're open to that and totally accepting of it, do you still want to be, aligned with a group that has very negative perceptions of the transgender population or anything else? You see, I'm just using that as one example, right? So where do we differentiate our own ideas, our own creative thoughts from those of the group? And that's what this lunation is about, because it asks us, as we see that there's a sextile being made between that Mercury-Pluto conjunction to the South Node and a trine to the North Node. We've got the Venus-Mars conjunction leading into this lunation, the luminaries themselves squaring the transiting nodal axis, and Jupiter sextiling Uranus, which is another expansion of freedom, right? But basically freedom to understand things on a higher, more conscious level. That's an opportunity for us to take the knowledge that we've gained, and I'm thinking here in particularly in relationship, for example, to the pandemic, as we loosen mask mandates, both in the U.S. and elsewhere, or in certain areas of different countries, including the U.S., what have we learned about the pandemic that will gives us the opportunity to do this? And how do we apply that? Should it be universally or should it be, place by place? and the addition, like I said, of Hygeia's opposition to Uranus, which brings in the whole issue of health to begin with. So I will be writing more about this lunation, and I will have it posted on my Facebook page, which is, again, Karmic Evolution for Your Soul. So if you would be so kind to follow me there, you will find this before this lunation hits, which is going to be the 16th, which is next Wednesday, the day before my next show. And I will reiterate some of that on the show just to bring everybody up to speed. But, you know, the other thing I think that I neglected to mention is that this lunation also shows us that the Mars-Pluto conjunction, still in effect, but I'm sorry, Mercury-Pluto conjunction. Mercury will have moved into Aquarius by this lunation. I mentioned that they sextile and trine the nodal axis, but they will also be quincunxed by the moon and semi-sextiled by the sun. So the quincunx by the moon to Mercury, Pluto, implies that we need to make an adjustment to the way that we're thinking about how we control others through our communication, and where, you know, others control us through communication. So we'll talk a little bit more about that next week, but again, feel free to read my writing on it within probably after this weekend, day or two before the actual lunation occurs. So it's time to wrap up now. I'm out of time, and I thank everyone for joining me today. I hope you found the information presented here helpful as you continue your karmic evolution in this lifetime. Please be sure to join me next week, February 17th, for another episode of Karmic Evolutions, Astrologically Speaking. Until then, may your journey be filled with karmic healing and the joy of greater consciousness. Namaste.
Long ago, before this day's confusion did begin, throughout the stars did we go wandering. Distance was no barrier, and time it had no hold. Free to come and free to go.